Hi, my name is Daniel Foley Carter, and in this video, we're going to talk about alternative page with proper canonical tag. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel this is probably one of those things that if someone was new to SEO or fairly junior, they may look at that and think, wow, what on earth is that? So I'm going to explain in this video what it is, and that it's very easy to get your head around, and that it does play a fairly important part in SEO, in both identifying it and addressing it. So the best way for me to be able to explain to you how to interpret the data here and how to address it. First, let me explain the principle of the canonical tag. And then I can sort of run through with you the way to interpret it. So basically, a canonical tag is like an instruction. So Google will follow instructions you give it. So the easiest way to do this and to explain it is to show you a scenario. Okay. So if we had, I'm just going to try and make this as simple as possible using a car analogy. Okay, so we have our blue Ford Fiesta. Now, admittedly, probably not the best example, but a very simple one to get your head around. In fact, actually, let's make this a bit better. Let's do it by color. Okay. Now we're gonna pretend that they're the same model. I mean, they are the same model, but they're a different year. But just pretend that they're exactly the same car. Okay. And we have our description. So this is a blue Ford Focus, 1.25 Z-Tech. And this is our red Ford. Actually, no, do you know what? I'm actually going to backtrack and use my original example, because I think that actually works better. So let's use this one. Here we go. Do apologize. Not entirely sure what is going on here with paint. There we go. Okay. So imagine a car dealership website, and imagine that they have two blue Ford Focus or Fiesta, whatever it is, 1.25 Z-Tech. So it's the same thing, but it's two vehicles. Okay, so if it's a car dealership and they have two of these cars on site, okay, and they're both 1.25 litre Focus Z-Techs, they're two separate products. They're two different cars because they're going to have different mileage. They might have different trim. But fundamentally, the product is almost the same thing. Okay. So there's not going to be a great deal of differentiation. Okay. So you might have like a 500-word description about it being a Ford Focus. So you might have, this is a lovely, elegant 1.25 Ford Focus finished in Matsuma blue. It's S-line spec. I'm just making this up. But my point is that these pages, these products are going to be very close together. Okay. So you might find that, there's different photos. So let's look at the things that would be unique. So they would have different photos. They might have, I don't know, similar spec, but minor variation. Maybe one has an electric sunroof, one doesn't. Different mileage, different number of owners, different MOT date. Okay. But when we look at this, these pages, they're not going to have a great deal of unique content. So, different photos, that's a visual, similar spec. So you're going to have a handful of words to cover the difference in spec. Mileage is a couple of numbers, different number of owners, one or two numbers, different MOT. So the unique bits of information are almost like a tiny portion of the page. So Google came up with a solution. Now, what we're doing here is we're just using one small example. So you imagine a car platform, Auto Trader. What are they going to do if they have 500 of these things, which is perfectly feasible? If it's a nationwide car platform, they're going to have hundreds of the same product. Okay. Now, there are obviously a number of ways to deal with that, but keeping it really simple, if we left Google to its own devices, there could be consequences for that, which I'll explain to you shortly. Now, we wouldn't necessarily tell Google that, this is the same thing, but we could. So I'm just explaining the principle of the canonical tag. I'm not saying that you should do this. This is just a principle. Maybe it would be better if we had like a Ford Fiesta category with pages below it for different trims. My microphone's trying to run away again. So, generally you wouldn't canonicalize one product to another, but I'm teaching you the logic, and then that can be applied in different ways. But for argument's sake, the canonical tag, you're basically saying to Google, so you have what's called a canonical parent, and you may see this defined as something called a self-referencing canonical. And then you might have what's called a canonical child. Okay. So a canonical parent is us basically saying this URL should be indexed. Okay. The page is referring to itself, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And then we're basically saying to Google, hey, look, this page is very similar to this page. Okay, so the canonical child, which is in the form of a tag, will point to that. So we now need to explain this. So let's say our website is www.mycar.com/cars/Fiesta/0989. So let's say it's got like a car ID or something like that. Okay. And then this URL could be .09990. Okay, so they're different URLs. So when we go to a website, we can view the canonical tags by going on the page, click page source, search for canonical, and we can see it here. And the way that you do it is you just look at the page you're on and look at the canonical. Is the URL in the tag the same as the page you're on? If so, that's self-referencing. If the URL is different, then it's a canonical child. So what that might look like here is this. So mycar.com/cars/fiesta/0989. Okay. So this one is the parent. And this one would be this. Because we're saying to Google when it comes to this URL, the 0990 URL, actually, this is our parent. Okay. So Google will go, not always, but in most cases, Google will go, all right, so we'll ignore this 990 URL because it's a canonical child. So what that means is that Google won't index or serve this URL. Now you might be thinking, well, why don't we want them both indexed? Surely that's better. Well, this is the next part that I need to explain. Now, in isolated cases like where you've got maybe two pages that are similar to one another, the probability of this being a problem is low. But when you start bringing this up at scale, then it becomes a problem. Let me explain why. So we'll do another paint. And we'll go to Search Console. Now I'm going to have to use a different analogy here. So if we go to Performance, okay. Now pretend this was Ford Fiesta, blue Ford Fiesta as a query. Now, what can happen is if we take, this is our position in Google. If we now open our paint, I don't know why a new one didn't open. What can happen is that Google might return this one here. Let's actually make this bigger so it's easier to visualize. Okay. And then Google might, one day think, actually, do you know what? I don't know why it's done that. Let's get the other one. Now, ignore the fact that the cross is over it. Just pretend that it's the same as the other one. What can happen is that if we did nothing about it, this URL might be ranking in Google and it might be on an upward trajectory, doing really well. And then one day, Google might think, I'm not sure that's the best URL. I'll return the other one. And it might return this one. So what can happen is that if there are lots of pages that are fairly similar because they don't have much to differentiate them, it can cause something called cannibalization. Cannibalization is where one URL is displaced by another URL. Now, Google can do all sorts of weird things. Sometimes it can even pick the worst version of a page and choose that as the main page to represent the keyword that it's aimed at. For example, this one might be linked to from the home page and hundreds of other pages. This one might, be linked to, from only a handful of pages. But Google knows both exist. So if it decides to drop the stronger one in favor of the weaker one, that can take with it the average position. This is called cannibalization. Cannibalization is bad. We do not want it. Now, here we're using two products. You imagine if you've got 500 products or 10,000 products, then the problem starts to become a much bigger problem at scale. So typically, one of the ways that we can do this is with the canonical tag. So when the canonical tag is in place and we're saying to Google, here are pages that are similar, but this is the main page that we want to represent. Okay. Google will go, okay, I won't index that. And remember what I said in the previous indexing video, that Google, even if Google doesn't index this page, it will report on it. Now, this page is an alternative page with a proper canonical tag, because this is a proper canonical tag. This is an alternate page. So Google won't index it, but it will report it here. So fundamentally, this is Google telling us, I recognize that you have pages on your site that are similar to other pages because you've told us that. So if we now take a real life example and an example of why this is important. Okay. So here we have a product. So if we click on view page source and then we click canonical, we search for canonical, sorry. We can see here, here's our URL, but if we look, it's not the same, because if you look here, the URL finishes here. And then after, we can see question mark page and product equals Mentos - tropical bag. We can see what's called a query string. So fundamentally, a query string could change something in the page. So an example of this, you could have this product and want a multi-pack of 10 or 20 or 30. So if you select the multi-pack from 20 to 30, okay, it's going to change the URL, but fundamentally the page is exactly the same. The only thing that's changed is the quantity of product, but it's the same page. Okay, so what we don't want is, we don't want Google to index, every variant, because there's no differentiation in the page. And if we allow it, Google will get confused. Which Mentos tropical bag page do I return? Do I return the 20 pack, the 12 pack, the 30 pack? I don't know. So what we're telling Google is that this variant of the page is a canonical child. So whatever happens, if Google crawls all different variants that are applied, it knows that these are variants and to ignore them. So Google won't get confused and it won't create the cannibalization problem. So you can see here that there are various iterations. So one of the most common times that you'll see this is where URLs are parameter driven. So you can see here, for example, we have 487. So if I select this, and if the number was larger, I'd export it. If I now just press Control F and question mark, it doesn't do it in Firefox. It should highlight. Oh, we have highlight all. We can see here, look, they're all parameter driven versions. So all Google's doing is finding all of the variants of the product and realizing that these variants is still the same product. Therefore, don't do anything with it. Don't index it. And it doesn't have to be variant. It could be add to cart functionality, add to wish list functionality. Sometimes you can have a page with functionality in it that when you click it, it appends something to the URL. Well, to Google, that's a new URL. But with the canonical tag, it's not a new URL. And it means that Google doesn't get overwhelmed trying to decide which page should I return. Okay. So typically, in scenarios like this is actually okay, because it's when it's not controlled that it's a problem. But if it's appearing in here, it means that that Google is aware that, there are canonical variants of a page. Now, whilst this is okay, I generally don't like to have a site where this actually is allowed to happen. Okay. So what I mean by that is I don't want a scenario where Google can see loads of different variant URLs on a product. So if we go back to our example, okay. Now there's nothing on here at the minute that allows me to append anything to the URL apart from that. So actually, this is a good example. So if I clear the parameter from the URL, this is the canonical parent. This piece of functionality, if I click it, is going to, well, it would usually add, I think it's broken. Clicking that, if we copy the link, we can see that there's our add to wish list URL. So Google's coming along, and obviously it's seeing this and it's able to find these variant URLs. So with the canonical tag in place, it is in check. Okay. But if we wanted to go one further, let's say, for example, add to wish list because it's on all of the products. What I typically tend to do, and a good way of doing anything within page indexing, is always look for common patterns in URLs. So add to wish list, for example, appears quite a lot. So one of the ways that I would typically address this is by doing the following. Now, this gets a little bit more advanced. I would say this goes out of the remit of what a beginner would do. So you can watch this. You don't necessarily need to understand it at this point, but it would be something that I would come back to. So some of the key things that I tend to do is, first of all, I'll name the sheet what it is so that I know. I forgot what one it is now. It's that one. Okay, so I'm going to name that for bulk co. And I've got my export of URLs. So first of all, a couple of things that I typically do is I will freeze the row and I will create a filter. And now what I want to do is do what's called segmenting. So segmenting is basically, right, I've got all of these URLs. Is there a pattern that I can see in these URLs? And then if I look at the pattern, I can then figure out with each pattern, how do I address it? So the first thing that I know is from the export, nearly every single URL is parameter driven. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is split parameter driven URLs from non-parameter driven URLs. So parameter URLs, and then I'm going to click here, text contains, and then I'll do that in question mark. And then I'll duplicate that and call it static URLs. And I'll basically do the same thing in reverse, text does not contain. Okay, so we can see that we've got some static URLs and we've got some parameter driven URLs. And the next thing that I want to do is obviously deal with the ones at bulk. So looking at these URLs, what can I see? So I constantly see question mark add to cart, question mark page. So, and then we've got add to wish list. So let's start breaking these out. So question mark add. So we have add to cart and add to wish list. and then I'm going to filter them by this. So question mark, add to cart. Is that right? Where's add? Oh, it's adds -2. Okay. So add to cart. Don't need that in the front for that. Click OK. So we've got add to cart, and then we're going to duplicate that. And then the next one is add to wish list. Now, one of the things also to do is as you do this, as you do each segment, we need to remove it from our origin sheet. So as we filter them out into their sheets, we're removing them from the list, and that's how we do it. So what we're going to do, we're going to Control A, Control C, then we're going to click data, remove filter, delete. Then you're going to Control V, so you're going to paste it back. Click data, create a filter again. Now we need to get rid of all of the ones that we've been segmenting out. So we need to get rid of add to cart. So put text does not contain add to cart. Then we Control A, Control C, data, remove filter, delete. Control V, data, create a filter. And then next we want to get rid of add to wish list. So text does not contain add to wish list. Now, again, I have to keep stressing this. Don't worry if you've got lost on this part or what I'm doing now. Just the first part is the main thing for you to learn. This you will come back to. Okay, so we've got text does not contain. Is that right? That looks to have gone wrong. Okay, so nearly all of them are adds to wish list. Wow, okay. Yeah, okay, all right. So literally if we get rid of adds to wish list, there's nothing left. Okay, so yeah, and these are all that are left. So this is how you do it. You basically, you segment out by path, what you can see. So we know that pretty much all of these are adds to wish list, but they're blended in with other variables as well. So we can see question mark page, we can see question mark page, question mark product. So these are all URLs that are parameter driven. So the next thing that I would be looking at is to say, well, rather than allowing Google to find them and then read the canonical tag, we could actually tell Google, that it's not allowed to access certain things. So, for example, there's no point where adds to wish list adds a benefit, but we have to ascertain, do any of the URLs on the site that are indexed use any of these paths before we can block them. So, for example, these are all canonical child URLs. So the canonical parent for this is the URL before question mark. So then we can see like product equals, we can see post underscore type equals, adds to wish list. So the best way of doing it is looking at, if we're going to block variables to stop this, is there any traffic? So one of the things that you would do is you would go to performance, last 16 months, and you would do a check. So we're going to check add underscore to underscore wish list. Sorry, select page. So add _to wish list. And we can see like next to nothing. So we don't care if we block that. Then we have products equals. So what I do is I look to see, is there any data? Now, if there's no data for the for these paths, for the canonical child paths, what I would then do is say, okay, well, we're going to block anything that's got adds to wish list. So at this point, what we would do is we would go to our robots text and we would edit this. So we would edit this and we would block the path. So just say, let's go down here. So we would say, we would disallow it and then add _to wish list. And what that will do is it will just block Google. So instead of Google coming along and seeing, hundreds of variations of something, if those variations don't actually do anything where the content can be indexed, then there's no point actually even letting Google get to the point where it sees something as a canonical child. Now, this last bit that I've just covered is definitely not for beginners or for early on users. So again, you don't need to worry about this now. You will understand this and you will be able to pick it up. So this video is like a hybrid video. It's sort of good for beginners, but also it provides resolution for people that maybe are sort of intermediate experience. So fundamentally, this is Google telling us that it knows one piece of content is similar to another, why it's happened, and we've demonstrated that, and how you can typically address that. Now, one last thing. When you crawl your website, the other thing that you can do is you can, on the overview tab, you can scroll down and look for canonicals. And you can see here. So what this does is this gives you a summary. So contains canonical and then self-referencing. So self-referencing is like the standard. So if you've got all unique pages, they will all have self-referencing canonicals. If you have, some pages that are very similar to one another, you might canonicalize them. So here, when you've crawled your website, this will tell you if your canonicals are self-referencing or if there are canonical child URLs. Now, you'll see on our crawl that there is nothing present. There's no canonicalized URLs. But in here, you'll see that there is. Now, as I said before, the reason for a lot of this is because Google has found parameters in the past. And once it's found them and it's seen that it's a canonical child, it doesn't matter if the URL is gone or doesn't exist anymore. Google remembers it. Okay. So these aren't necessarily all going to be valid anyway. But generally, you don't necessarily need to worry about it. But it's more important that on your website, when you do crawl it, that if there are canonicalized URLs, you need to look at what they are. You need to look at if they should be canonicalized or whether actually they should just be flat out blocked. Because again, it's not really, there's no value. If you had a product, okay, and that product had 50 variants, you have to ask yourself, is it viable for the variant pages to rank? So in some cases, that might be the case. Like in Google, you would want a pair of blue shoes, Nike shoes that are in blue and Nike shoes that are in green to both be there, because even though they are the same product, the only difference is the color. But where that becomes a problem is that if you have, I don't know, if you have 50 variants of a green Nike trainer, where the variants aren't really something that people search for, and where there's no value. So fundamentally, we want to try and minimize this. It's not the end of the world if it grows, but if you see, thousands of pages and it's growing massively and you only have a small site, then you may need to go through the process that I highlighted of looking at the URLs, segmenting them by type, i.e. question mark variable, and then looking at whether or not you should restrict those. Anyhow, that's today's lesson for alternative page with proper canonical tag. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Feel free to visit assertive-uk.com. That's ASSERTIVEUK.com. Or our audit site at seo-audits.io, or our Google Search Console replacement, which is www.seo-stack.io. Thank you for watching. My name's Daniel Foley Carter.